My name is Sarah. I am 31 years old, and I build digital fortresses for a living. I spend 60 hours a week running penetration tests, securing cloud architectures, and finding vulnerabilities that people think are perfectly hidden. I deal in logic, access codes, and verifiable data. My family, on the other hand, deals in illusions. I know how to bypass military-grade firewalls, which is why it was almost funny when I found myself standing in the pouring Seattle rain on a Tuesday afternoon, locked out of my own family's estate by a cheap, off-the-shelf smart lock. Grandma Rose's funeral had been barely 4 days ago. The floral arrangements hadn't even wilted yet. But when I punched my code into the keypad of the historic Marina estate, a red LED flashed. Access denied. A second later, the intercom speaker crackled to life. It was my mother, Brenda. Her voice was dripping with that practiced, artificial sweetness she saved for when she was holding all the cards. "Sarah, honey, you shouldn't be here," she said through the speaker. "Your father and I are taking over the estate in the marina now. We've decided it's best if we have a clean break. The property is ours, and frankly, you aren't welcome anymore." She thought she had locked me out of my inheritance. She thought she had neatly severed me from the family legacy, securing the house, the docks, and the business for herself. What Brenda didn't know was that a year before her death, Grandma Rose had quietly transferred all her assets into a private LLC. She didn't know the total valuation was $14.8 million. And she definitely didn't know that Grandma had made me the sole, irrevocable owner of that LLC. Welcome back to Raw Drama Stories. This is the place where ordinary people stop apologizing, stop shouting, and start letting the paperwork do the talking. If you've ever been pushed out, underestimated, or treated like a stranger by your own family, this story is for you. Drop a comment, tell me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe. Now, let me take you back to that front porch. I stood there in the rain, looking directly into the little glowing lens of the doorbell camera. Through the glass panels of the front door, I could see shadows moving in the foyer. My father, Tom, was probably standing right behind her, keeping quiet, letting Brenda do the dirty work, just like he always had. "I have belongings inside, Mom," I said. My voice didn't shake. In my line of work, when a system locks you out, you don't scream at the monitor. You step back and find the back door. "We'll box up whatever cheap clothes you left in the guest room and mail them to your apartment," Brenda replied cheerfully. "But the business records, the antiques, the house, that stays with the rightful heirs. Goodbye, Sarah." The intercom clicked off. The red light on the keypad blinked twice, finalizing the lockout. I didn't bang on the door. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten to call a lawyer. I simply pulled up my jacket collar, turned around, and walked back to my car. As I started the engine and wiped the rain from my face, my mind immediately shifted into audit mode. Brenda was moving too fast. Changing locks on a multi-million-dollar estate days after a death wasn't just greedy. It was panicked. She was trying to secure the physical perimeter, which meant there was something in that house, or in the marina's servers, that she desperately needed to hide. I put the car in drive and pulled out of the estate gates. Brenda had successfully locked me out of the physical house. But she had forgotten one crucial detail. I was the one who originally set up the marina's digital network. I live in a loft in downtown Seattle. It isn't much to look at from the outside, just exposed brick, industrial windows, and a heavy steel door. But inside, it is a digital fortress. My desk holds 3 curved monitors, a dedicated server rack humming quietly in the corner, and enough processing power to map the network traffic of a small city. When I walked through my front door, I didn't bother to take off my wet jacket. I dropped my keys on the granite counter, sat down in my ergonomic chair, and woke up the screens. Brenda thought a shiny brass deadbolt was enough to keep me out. She didn't understand that in the 21st century, physical doors are just suggestions. 5 years ago, when Grandma Rose's marina started rapidly expanding its slip rentals and commercial contracts, she asked me to modernize the business. I spent 3 months migrating their decades of paper ledgers, vendor contracts, and client manifests into a highly secure cloud environment. Brenda and Tom had happily taken the credit for the efficiency upgrade at the time, bragging to their country club friends about their modern business acumen. But they had absolutely no idea how the architecture actually worked. More importantly, they didn't know I had provisioned a dormant, heavily encrypted super admin account for myself, just in case Grandma ever got locked out of her own systems. It took me exactly 4 minutes and 12 seconds to bypass the marina's Active Directory, mask my IP address, and drop silently into the central server. The main administrative dashboard loaded on my center screen. I didn't go for the obvious checking accounts first. Amateurs look at the front-facing bank balances. Professionals look at the back-end audit logs. I pulled up the raw transaction history for the past 3 years, exporting it into a massive, multi-tabbed spreadsheet. My eyes tracked the columns, my brain slipping into the familiar, comforting rhythm of forensic data analysis. Numbers don't have egos. Numbers don't lie to your face through an intercom camera. Within 20 minutes, the pattern emerged. It was sloppy, arrogant. Every single month, massive payments were being routed out of the marina's operational fund under the guise of marine equipment consultation and dock maintenance assessments. The vendor receiving the funds was a company called Apex Marine Solutions. I ran a quick query on the Washington Secretary of State Public Corporate Database. Apex Marine Solutions wasn't a real vendor. It was a shell LLC. The registered agent was a P.O. box in Bellevue. I dug deeper, writing a quick script to trace the banking routing numbers. The fiat currency wasn't staying in a traditional bank. It was being immediately converted into cryptocurrency through an offshore exchange known for its lax regulatory oversight. They were washing the money. But the blockchain is a public ledger, and people who think crypto is completely anonymous usually make one fatal mistake. They log into their digital wallets from their own home IP addresses. I pulled the login metadata from the marina's internal communications server, cross-referenced the timestamps with the crypto exchange API pings I managed to scrape, and found the match. The IP addresses logging into that offshore wallet belonged to 2 locations. One was my parents' house. The other belonged to my Uncle Gary, my father's older brother, a man who hadn't held a legitimate job since 2014, yet mysteriously drove a brand new Porsche. Together, Brenda and Gary had siphoned $1.2 million in the last 18 months alone. If you have ever had that gut feeling that someone in your family was lying to your face, but you didn't have the proof yet, you know the exact cold focus that takes over your body in a moment like this. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to become a silent investigator in your own family. Let's get back to the servers. I leaned back in my chair. The glow of the monitors reflected off the cold cup of coffee I hadn't touched. So, my mother and my uncle were thieves. But that didn't entirely explain the panic. That didn't explain changing the locks 4 days after a funeral. Theft is a slow, quiet crime. Locking a daughter out of a family estate is a desperate, noisy one. I needed to know what they were preparing for. I switched my focus from the financial ledgers to the executive email server. Brenda had requested an automated deletion protocol for her inbox last year. clearing out anything older than 30 days. She thought that meant it was gone permanently. She didn't know about the immutable backup server I had installed in the damp basement of the Marina office, a RAID 5 array that copied every single packet of data before it could be wiped. I ran a script to rebuild her deleted inbox from the shadow copies. Thousands of emails populated my screen. I filtered the search by the keywords rows and assets. The results narrowed to a dozen threads. I clicked on an email chain dated 4 months ago. The sender was a Dr. Eris, a private concierge physician known in Seattle's wealthier circles for providing whatever paperwork his clients could afford. The subject line read, R.E., Medical Certification, Rose. I opened the PDF attachment. It was a formal, heavily stamped medical evaluation declaring that Grandma Rose was suffering from advanced progressive dementia. It cited memory lapses, paranoia, and an inability to recognize family members, symptoms that existed entirely in Brenda's imagination and Dr. Eris's bank account. The document concluded that Rose lacked the cognitive capacity to manage her estate or make legally binding decisions. It was completely backdated. My stomach turned, a cold, heavy knot forming just below my ribs. Grandma Rose was sharp as a tack until the aneurysm took her suddenly last week. She did the Sunday crossword in pen. She wasn't sick. But Brenda and Gary had paid Dr. Eris $25,000 to manufacture a fake medical history. It was a preemptive insurance policy. They suspected Grandma was going to leave the estate to me, so they created a false medical record to invalidate her will in probate court. If she was legally declared incompetent, any trust or deed she signed would be voided, and the $14.8 million estate would automatically default to her next of kin, Brenda and Tom. I sat in the quiet of my apartment, listening to the steady hum of my servers. Brenda wasn't just stealing money. She was trying to steal my grandmother's dignity. She was trying to legally erase the brilliant, capable mind of the woman who had built that business from the ground up. I pressed my hands flat against the desk. The anger was there, hot and sharp. But I didn't let it rise. Anger makes you impulsive. Anger makes you bang on locked doors in the rain. Instead, I opened a secure, encrypted folder on my desktop. I named it Exhibit A. I saved the IP logs. I saved the shell company routing numbers. I saved the forged medical certificates and the $25,000 wire transfer to the corrupt doctor. I had the what and the how. But as I started running a final sweep of Uncle Gary's recovered text messages, searching for any mention of the offshore crypto seeds, I stumbled onto a completely different thread. It was a conversation between Brenda and Gary from 2 years ago. It wasn't about money. It was about my younger sister, Chloe. I read the first 4 messages, and the air completely left my lungs. The stolen money was just a symptom. I had just found the disease. I stared at the 4 messages on my screen. They were dated 2 years ago, sent late at night, right around the time my father, Tom, had tried to hire an independent auditor for the marina. Brenda. He's asking too many questions about the Apex vendor accounts. You need to back off for a month. Gary. Let him ask. What's he going to do? Brenda. If he digs, he finds the offshore transfers. If he finds those, I'll tell him about Chloe. I'll tell him everything. Gary. You wouldn't. It would ruin you too. I'll tell him Chloe is yours. And then I'll take the house, the kids, and I'll pin the Apex transfers entirely on him. He signed the primary authorizations, Gary. He's trapped. I read the exchange 3 times. The glowing pixels on my monitor felt like they were burning the words into the back of my retinas. My sister Chloe, the golden child, the one who always got the new car, the private tuition, the endless praise from my mother, wasn't my father's daughter. She belonged to Uncle Gary. Suddenly, 20 years of family dynamics clicked into place like a perfectly compiled line of code. It explained why Uncle Gary was always at our house, eating our food, driving cars bought with Marina money. It explained why my mother treated my father with such thinly veiled contempt. And most importantly, it explained why Tom, a man who used to take me fishing, who used to build model boats with me in the garage, had shrunk into a silent, defeated shadow of a man. He wasn't an active participant in their embezzlement. He was a hostage. Brenda had used her own infidelity as a weapon. She had manipulated the vendor authorizations, tricking Tom into signing the initial paperwork for the shell companies under the guise of routine business upgrades. If he ever went to the police, she would hand over the documents proving he authorized the theft. And then she would drop the bomb that his favorite daughter wasn't even his. He chose silence to protect his relationship with Chloe. He chose to let them steal from his own mother rather than blow up his family. If you have ever realized that a parent you thought was just weak was actually being systematically destroyed by someone they loved, you know the exact kind of heartbreak I felt sitting in that chair. It doesn't make you want to scream. It makes you want to surgically dismantle the person holding the knife. Drop a comment if you've ever had to watch a toxic person hold your family hostage. Let's get back to the files. I dragged the text message thread into the encrypted folder labeled Exhibit A. The picture was complete. I had the motive, the mechanism, and the leverage they were using to keep it quiet. But knowing the truth and proving ownership in a probate court are two different things. Brenda still had that forged medical certificate from Dr. Eris. If she filed it with the county judge, she could freeze Grandma Rose's estate for years in costly litigation. I needed an override. I needed something irrefutable from Grandma Rose herself. I closed the terminal window and rubbed my tired eyes. It was past 2 a.m. The rain was still lashing against the industrial windows of my loft. I stood up to finally get that cup of coffee when my eyes landed on a cardboard box sitting in the shadows of my living room. 3 weeks ago, before Grandma Rose unexpectedly passed away, a courier had delivered that box to my apartment. Brenda had called me the same day, sounding incredibly annoyed. "Your grandmother is hoarding again, Sarah. She insisted on mailing you a box of absolute junk from the attic. Old photos, rusty trinkets. Just throw it away. I don't have the energy to deal with it." I hadn't thrown it away, but I hadn't opened it either. I'd been too busy running a security audit for a corporate client. I walked over to the corner and pulled a box cutter from my desk drawer. I sliced through the heavy packing tape. Inside, beneath a layer of bubble wrap, were exactly the kinds of things Brenda despised because they held sentimental value rather than monetary value. There were photo albums from the 1990s, a hand-knit blanket that smelled faintly of lavender, and a collection of old maritime maps detailing the original Seattle coastline. And at the very bottom, wrapped carefully in a thick wool sweater, was a heavy, ornate mechanical music box. It was crafted from dark mahogany, inlaid with mother-of-pearl, and rested on 4 brass feet. It was a beautiful antique, but that wasn't what caught my attention. What caught my attention was the fact that Grandma Rose had never collected music boxes. She hated them. She always said the repetitive tinkling sound gave her a migraine. I lifted the heavy wooden box out of the packaging and set it on my granite kitchen counter. I ran my fingers over the smooth wood. My grandmother was a pragmatic, brilliant woman who built a multi-million-dollar business in an era when women weren't even allowed to sign commercial leases without a husband's approval. She didn't send random junk through a bonded courier for no reason. I grabbed a high-powered flashlight from my drawer and inspected the brass winding key on the back. It didn't turn. It was locked firmly in place. I flipped the box upside down. The wooden panel on the bottom was completely seamless, but when I pressed my thumb against the center, the wood felt distinctly hollow. In cybersecurity, we call this steganography, hiding a secret message inside an ordinary, non-suspicious object so that nobody even knows to look for it. Brenda thought she was looking at attic trash. She didn't realize she was looking at a vault. I walked back to my toolkit, pulled out a micro screwdriver, and prepared to crack the one physical system my grandmother had designed specifically for me. I worked the micro screwdriver into the microscopic seam along the bottom edge of the mahogany music box. In the world of cybersecurity, we rely on digital keys, complex algorithms, two-factor authentication, biometric scans. But there is a distinct, visceral satisfaction in defeating a physical lock. I applied a millimeter of pressure, angling the steel tip just right. A soft, metallic click echoed in the quiet of my loft. The wooden panel released, sliding outward on hidden internal tracks. I set the screwdriver down and pulled the panel free. Inside the velvet-lined cavity lay two items: a sealed envelope made of heavy, cream-colored parchment and a rugged, titanium-cased biometric flash drive. The drive was military-grade, the kind designed to automatically wipe its own memory if tampered with. Grandma Rose had never even owned a smartphone, but she knew exactly who her granddaughter was, and she knew how to speak my language. I picked up the envelope first. My name was written across the front in her elegant, sweeping cursive. I broke the wax seal. Yes, she actually used a wax seal, and unfolded the thick paper. My dearest Sarah, if you are reading this, I am gone, and Brenda has likely already tried to lock you out. Your mother has always been a woman who thinks she is the smartest person in the room simply because she is the loudest. For 3 years, I have watched her and your Uncle Gary bleed the marina's operational accounts. I let them think they were getting away with it. I let them funnel their stolen money into those ridiculous, invisible digital coins, because as long as they thought they were winning, they wouldn't look at the real assets. I know about Dr. Eris. I know about the fraudulent dementia certificate they paid him to write. And, most tragically, I know about Chloe's true parentage. Your father is a broken man who made a coward's choice to protect his peace. But I will not let Brenda's blackmail destroy the legacy your grandfather and I built. That is why 14 months ago, I quietly moved the marina, the estate, and the remaining $14.8 million in liquid capital into a private LLC, entirely in your name. You are the sole owner. They are squatting in your house. The drive contains the rest. The passcode is the name of the boat we built in the garage when you were 10. Finish this, Sarah. Do it quietly, and do it permanently. I traced the ink with my fingertips. A knot in my throat tightened, but I didn't cry. Crying was for people who didn't have a plan. Grandma Rose had trusted me to be the architect of her final justice. I picked up the titanium flash drive and plugged it into the secure, air-gapped terminal on my desk. A black prompt screen immediately popped up, demanding a decryption key. I didn't hesitate. I typed Chesapeake, the name of the clumsy, lopsided wooden dinghy Tom and I had glued together before the family fell apart. I hit enter. The drive decrypted. Inside was a single, high-definition video file and a master text document. I clicked on the video. The screen flickered to life. Grandma Rose was sitting in her favorite leather wingback chair in the estate's library. She looked immaculate, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing her sharpest blazer. In her hands, she held a copy of the Seattle Times, clearly displaying the date from just 6 weeks ago, proving exactly when this was recorded. Her voice was crisp, authoritative, and completely devoid of the progressive dementia Dr. Aris had so profitably diagnosed. "My name is Rose Eleanor Mitchell," she said, looking directly into the camera lens. "I am of sound mind, and I am recording this statement to preemptively dismantle the fraudulent medical claims my daughter Brenda has purchased from a disgraced physician. By the time this is viewed, my estate has already been legally transferred to my granddaughter, Sarah. Brenda and Gary have embezzled $1.2 million. I have provided the digital trails, the offshore wallet addresses, and the notarized transfer deeds in the attached files." She paused, a hard, familiar glint in her eyes. "Brenda thinks she has secured her future. I want you to take it all from her, Sarah. Not a single cent gets left behind." The video ended. The screen faded to black, leaving only my reflection in the monitor. I opened the attached master document. It was a gold mine. It contained the notarized LLC operating agreement, proving my 100% ownership of the estate and the business, the cryptographic seed phrases to the secure backup accounts where the real millions were safely locked away, and a signed affidavit from her actual long-term physician confirming her perfect cognitive health up until the day she died. Brenda's fake medical certificate was officially worthless. Her blackmail was neutralized. She and Gary were sitting in a multi-million-dollar house they had zero legal right to occupy, spending stolen money they were about to go to federal prison for taking. If you have ever been told to just keep the peace while toxic people tear your family apart, stay with me. The time for keeping the peace was over. It was time to introduce Brenda to the consequences of her own arrogance. I looked at the clock. It was 3:45 a.m. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I kept saved for absolute emergencies. It rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered. "It's 3 in the morning, Sarah. This better be a corporate takeover or a federal indictment." "It's both, Marcus," I said, leaning back in my chair. Marcus was a corporate litigator who specialized in hostile asset recovery. He didn't have a heart. He had a calculator and a law degree. "I need an ironclad eviction notice, an emergency asset freeze, and a direct line to the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. How fast can we move?" I could hear him sit up. The annoyance in his voice vanished, replaced by the sharp, predatory focus of a shark smelling blood in the water. "Send me the files." The trap was fully built. Now, all I had to do was wait for Brenda to step onto the pressure plate. Marcus's office sat on the 42nd floor of a high-rise. It didn't look like a law firm. There were no dusty books. It looked like an operating room. Stark, bright, and ruthlessly efficient. I sat across from him at 9 o'clock the next morning, sliding the titanium flash drive across the polished concrete table. "I need you to tell me if there is a single microscopic crack in this armor," I said. Marcus plugged the drive into his secure terminal. He didn't speak for 45 minutes. He read Grandma Rose's LLC agreement, examined the cryptographic seed phrases, and reviewed the sworn affidavit from her actual physician. He watched the video statement twice. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mix of professional admiration and predatory anticipation. "Your grandmother," Marcus said quietly, "was a terrifyingly brilliant woman. This LLC structure isn't just ironclad. It's a legal black hole. Brenda doesn't own the house. She doesn't own the marina. She doesn't even own the gravel in the driveway. The moment Rose signed this 14 months ago, you became the sole proprietor of a $14.8 million empire. And the forged medical certificate? I asked. Garbage, Marcus replied. A backdated diagnosis from a disgraced concierge doctor holds zero weight against a time-stamped video deposition and an affidavit from a board-certified primary care physician. If Brenda tries to file that in court, she's committing perjury. The real issue is the $1.2 million they've already embezzled. If we tip our hand too early, they might panic and scramble the offshore wallets. They aren't scrambling them, I said, opening my laptop. They're emptying them. Over the next 10 days, I watched my mother and my uncle commit financial suicide in real time. From my loft, I monitored the marina's network traffic. Euphoria is a dangerous drug, and Brenda was completely intoxicated by her perceived victory. Believing she had successfully locked me out and secured the estate, she decided it was time to solidify her new social status. She started planning a celebration of life for Grandma Rose. But it wasn't a memorial. It was a coronation. I tracked the wire transfers from the offshore crypto exchange. They were liquidating massive chunks of stolen Bitcoin to fund the event. The digital receipts flowing through Brenda's inbox were staggering. $40,000 to a catering company for a bespoke seafood menu, $15,000 for a live string quartet, $25,000 for imported floral arrangements and a climate-controlled pavilion tent erected right on the main lawn. They were spending Grandma Rose's stolen money to throw a party celebrating the theft of her legacy. If you have ever watched toxic people proudly flaunt things they absolutely did not earn, you know how infuriating that entitlement can be. It takes every ounce of self-control not to scream, but screaming doesn't get your money back. Warrants do. Drop a comment below if you've ever had to sit back and quietly let a liar dig their own grave. Let's get back to the trap. Let them spend it, Marcus told me on the phone 3 days before the party. Let them pull the crypto back into U.S. jurisdictions to pay these vendors. The second that fiat currency hits their domestic accounts, it falls under federal purview. I've already shared your digital forensic packet with a contact at the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Because they used a forged medical document to facilitate wire fraud across international lines, this is no longer just a family dispute. It's a federal indictment waiting to happen. While Brenda was busy arguing with florists about the exact shade of white roses for the centerpieces, Marcus was quietly securing ex parte injunctions. An ex parte order means the judge grants the freeze without notifying the other party, because notifying them would give them a chance to hide the assets. The trap was being set, spring-loaded, and buried in the dirt right beneath Brenda's expensive new designer shoes. On the evening of the party, I stood in my loft and looked at myself in the mirror. I didn't put on a cocktail dress. I didn't dress for a celebration. I put on a sharp, tailored black blazer, dark slacks, and a pair of sensible leather boots. I dressed the same way I would for a hostile corporate audit, because that was exactly what I was about to perform. I checked my phone. One new message from Marcus. Warrants are signed. Federal freeze is active. Accounts are locked. See you at the gates. I picked up the heavy, cream-colored envelope containing Grandma Rose's true LLC deed and the ruthless, immediate eviction notice Marcus had drafted. Brenda thought she had changed the locks on my future. Tonight, in front of every single person she was trying to impress, I was going to show her exactly who held the master key. I grabbed my car keys, walked out of my digital fortress, and drove out into the Seattle night. I parked my car just outside the wrought iron gates of the estate. The gravel driveway was lined with luxury vehicles, the kind that cost more than a starter home. Across the manicured main lawn, the massive, climate-controlled pavilion tent glowed with warm, amber lighting. I could hear the faint, elegant hum of the string quartet carrying over the water. Brenda had spared absolutely no expense. It was a beautiful night for a reckoning. Marcus was already waiting by his black sedan. He wasn't alone. Standing next to him, thumbs tucked casually into his duty belt, was Sheriff Davies. The sheriff had known Grandma Rose for 20 years. He didn't look happy to be crashing a memorial, but he looked even less happy about the federal wire fraud warrants resting in the breast pocket of his uniform. "Ready?" Marcus asked. He adjusted his tie, his face completely devoid of emotion. "I've been ready since she locked the front door," I replied. The three of us walked up the driveway, our footsteps crunching in unison against the gravel. We bypassed the hired security at the front door. Sheriff Davies just flashed his badge and the guard stepped aside, and walked straight through the house toward the back terrace. The pavilion was packed. At least 200 of Seattle's wealthiest socialites, country club members, and local politicians were mingling around tables draped in white silk. Waiters circulated with silver trays of champagne. At the far end of the tent, standing on a raised acrylic stage, was my mother. Brenda was wearing a bespoke black gown that probably cost $5,000. She was holding a microphone, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief, performing her grief for the audience. Uncle Gary stood right behind her, looking solemn and wearing a new Rolex. My father, Tom, was seated at a front table, staring down at his hands, looking like a ghost haunting his own life. And though my mother's mind faded in those final months, Brenda was saying, her voice echoing through the state-of-the-art sound system, she always taught us the value of hard work. She taught Gary and me that a family's legacy must be protected. We are so honored to take the helm of this estate, to guide the marina into its next chapter, and to honor her memory through our stewardship. The crowd murmured in sympathetic agreement. A few people raised their glasses. I didn't wait for the applause. I walked directly past the catering tables, stepped up to the audio technician's soundboard, and pulled the main power cord straight out of the wall. The microphone cut out with a sharp, ugly screech. The string quartet stopped playing. 200 heads turned. The silence that fell over the pavilion was absolute, thick, and suffocating. Brenda saw me. The practiced, mournful expression vanished from her face instantly, replaced by a flash of pure, unadulterated rage. She lowered the dead microphone and glared down from the stage. "What are you doing here?" Brenda hissed, her voice carrying easily in the dead quiet. "You were expressly told you are not welcome on this property. Security! Get her out of here!" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I walked toward the stage, stopping just a few feet away. "This isn't your property, Brenda. It hasn't been for 14 months. Gary stepped forward, his face flushed. "Sarah, you're making a fool of yourself. Your grandmother had dementia. She didn't know what she was doing. We have the medical certificates. Now leave before you embarrass yourself further." That was Marcus's cue. He stepped out from the shadows of the crowd, holding the thick, cream-colored envelope. He walked right up to the edge of the stage and slapped a heavy stack of documents onto the acrylic floor right at Brenda's designer heels. Actually, she knew exactly what she was doing, Marcus said, his voice ringing with the polished, lethal clarity of a courtroom veteran. "I am Marcus Thorne, legal counsel for the sole proprietor of this estate. My client is Sarah Mitchell. What you are looking at is an irrevocable LLC deed executed 14 months ago, transferring 100% of this property, the marina, and all liquid assets into my client's name." Brenda scoffed, though her hands had started to shake. "That's invalid. She was sick. Dr. Eris certified it." "Dr. Eris is currently under federal investigation for medical fraud," Marcus replied smoothly. "And we have a time-stamped, high-definition video deposition from Rose Mitchell, recorded 6 weeks ago, explicitly detailing your embezzlement of $1.2 million, alongside a sworn affidavit of complete cognitive competence from her actual physician. Your medical certificate is forged. And unfortunately for you, using forged documents to facilitate the transfer of stolen funds across international lines is a federal crime." The color completely drained from Brenda's face. She looked like a marble statue that had just cracked. Gary took a step back, looking wildly toward the exit of the tent. "So, here is how the rest of your evening is going to go," Marcus continued, his tone turning to ice. "Your offshore crypto wallets have been frozen by federal injunction. Your domestic accounts are locked. And since you are currently trespassing on my client's property, you have exactly 30 minutes to collect whatever personal items fit into a single suitcase and vacate the premises." Brenda opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at the crowd, the socialites, the politicians, the friends she had tried so hard to impress. They were all staring at her in horrified silence. The illusion had shattered. The curtain had fallen. Sheriff Davies stepped up next to Marcus. He didn't look at Brenda with sympathy. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 2 thick, folded packets of paper. "Brenda Mitchell, Gary Mitchell," the sheriff said, his voice heavy with authority. "You are hereby served with federal subpoenas for wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The FBI will be expecting you at the Seattle field office at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning. I strongly suggest you don't miss it." At the front table, my father finally looked up. He looked from Gary to Brenda, then back to me. He had spent 2 years letting them destroy him because he thought they held the ultimate leverage. He didn't realize they had just ruined themselves. 30 minutes, Mom," I said calmly, looking her right in the eyes. "The clock is ticking." Watching someone's entire manufactured reality collapse is a remarkably quiet process. For years, Brenda had relied on volume. She controlled the family by being the loudest, the most demanding, the quickest to anger. But as the clock ticked down her 30 minutes, she didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. Confronted with a federal subpoena, an airtight LLC deed, and 200 silent witnesses, all her volume simply evaporated. The guests didn't stay for the cake. They filed out of the climate-controlled pavilion like attendees at a fire drill, murmuring polite, hushed excuses as they hurried to their luxury cars. By the time the 20-minute mark hit, the only sounds left on the estate were the distant lapping of the tide against the marina docks and the frantic squeak of suitcase wheels rolling across the hardwood floors of the master bedroom. Sheriff Davies stood by the front door, watching the clock. At exactly 30 minutes, Brenda and Gary walked out. They carried 1 suitcase each. Gary looked pale, his new Rolex gleaming uselessly under the porch lights. Brenda didn't look at me. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on the gravel driveway as they loaded their bags into the trunk of a leased Mercedes they were about to default on. I watched their taillights disappear down the coastal highway, the heavy wrought iron gates clicking shut behind them. The next morning, the FBI's Financial Crimes Division did not offer them coffee. Marcus and I had provided a perfectly wrapped forensic package. Offshore IP logins, shell company routing numbers, the forged medical certificate from the disgraced Dr. Eris, and Grandma Rose's time-stamped video. Federal prosecutors love cases where the victim does all the math for them. Brenda tried to play the victim, claiming she was just trying to manage a sick woman's affairs. The federal agents simply pressed play on Grandma Rose's video. Then they presented the blockchain ledger, proving Brenda had used stolen funds for bespoke catering and string quartets. She and Gary were indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy. The offshore crypto wallets were seized by the Department of Justice, and the stolen $1.2 million was quietly routed back into my LLC. My father, Tom, did not go down with them. The blackmail Brenda held over his head, the threat of exposing Chloe's parentage and framing him for the fraudulent vendor accounts, lost all its power the moment the truth was exposed. Once the FBI saw the full scope of Brenda's digital trail and heard Grandma's explanation of Tom's coercion, he was cleared of criminal intent. He wasn't a mastermind. He was a hostage. But he lost his family anyway. The difference was, this time, he finally found his spine. A week later, Tom filed for divorce. He didn't fight for a share of the estate. He knew it wasn't his to take. He packed his old truck, stopped by my loft to hand over his remaining keys, and gave me a long, quiet hug. He moved to the Florida coast to work on boat engines, starting over at 62. We speak on the phone occasionally. It isn't a perfect relationship, but it's an honest one. Chloe, the golden child who had never worked a day in her life, was forced to confront the reality of her parentage and the sudden evaporation of her trust fund. Last I heard, she moved in with a friend in Portland and had to take a job at a retail boutique. The luxury cars and private club memberships vanished the second the federal freeze hit Brenda's accounts. As for the estate, I didn't sell it. Grandma Rose spent her life building that marina, and I wasn't going to let it be chopped up and sold to developers. With full control of the $14.8 million trust and a completely debt-free business, I restructured the operation. I evicted the luxury yachts and partnered with the local university. Today, the historic Rose Mitchell Marina operates as a cutting-edge marine biology research center. My servers hum quietly in the basement, tracking tide patterns instead of crypto laundering. I still live in my industrial loft downtown. I still run penetration tests and build digital fortresses. The only difference is that now I own the fortress. When a system is infected with malware, you don't negotiate with it. You don't ask it to be kinder. You isolate it, you expose the corrupted code, and you hit delete. I spent 31 years watching my family operate like a virus, extracting resources and destroying the host. The night I pulled the plug on that microphone was the night I finally hit delete. That is my story. One titanium flash drive, one unbribable lawyer, and a grandmother who knew that the best defense against a loud liar is a quiet, verifiable fact. If you have ever been the scapegoat, locked out in the rain while thieves throw a party in your house, let this be your sign. Keep your receipts. Secure your servers. And remember that the people who tell you to keep the peace are usually the ones profiting from the war. Thank you so much for being here. Share this with someone who needs a reminder to check the locks on their own life. Drop a comment telling me your favorite part of this reckoning. Hit the like button and subscribe to Raw Drama Stories for more quiet, elegant justice. Protect your peace, and I will see you in the next one.